What is up, you guys? Welcome back to E&E Teachers. My name is Miss Redacted. Today we are going to be learning about sharecropping and convict leasing. Your teacher may have given you a little worksheet to go along with this. So if you have that, just make sure you're filling in those blanks and following along with me. You probably just learned about the Civil War, and you just learned how the Civil War was primarily fought over slavery. So today we're going to be talking about what happened when slavery was abolished. So slavery was abolished with the 13th Amendment in 1865. As you can see from this graphic, slavery existed for a very, very large portion of our country's history. America is actually a pretty young country when you look at like France and places like that. America is kind of like a new baby country, and America relied on slavery for 246 years. That is a very long time. So the 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. That was passed by Congress on January 31st, 1865. After Congress approves an amendment to our Constitution, it has to go to the states for them to ratify it. Ratifying it basically means the states approve it. They're like, yep, we're good, we agree. So even though Congress passed it in January, it did not get ratified all the way until December. So it did take a long time for even the law to get passed. And we know just because a law got passed does not mean that everyone woke up on December 7th and they were free and it was sunshine and rainbows and totally awesome. It is a lot more complicated than that. So let's get into it. If you have lived your entire life in slavery, you probably did not have access to education. You probably cannot read and write very well. You probably were not taught how to use like a sewing machine or different things that would help you get a good job. So most of the people freed from slavery did not have access to education, so they could not find jobs with decent wages. So to try and support these people and help these people, in March 1865, Congress created the Freedmen's Bureau. Freedman, meaning like person who's free. Bureau just means like a government office. And their job was to provide formerly enslaved people with basic necessities, to oversee their condition and their treatment in the former Confederate states. That is quite a large job because, like we saw, slavery existed for 246 years. So, in practice, the Freedmen's Bureau often fell short of this vast and historic undertaking because white mobs and institutions throughout the South continued to oppress, attack, and exploit African Americans during Reconstruction. And this is a painting of one of the Freedmen's Bureau offices. I'll use a mix of painting and pictures. Around this time, cameras existed, but they were kind of new. So that's why you see a mix of both. So, Freedmen's Bureau offices were very poorly staffed. There were 4 million people that were freed from slavery. That is a lot of people to try and find jobs and schools and support for. So they were poorly staffed and under-resourced. They were unable to cope with the numerous needs of formerly enslaved people, and they were still facing widespread violence and discrimination alongside the trauma and poverty from generations of slavery. So not only are people dealing with the fact that they were born into slavery and now they have to navigate this whole new world, they're also dealing with very active racial violence for facing every single day. So it really is, even though obviously it's great that slavery ended, like I said, it's not sunshine and rainbows. There's a lot of problems right now. So the Bureau Commissioner's Office was responsible for overseeing operations in the entire former Confederacy, and they had a staff of just 10 clerks. And by 1868, they only had 900 officials to serve millions and millions of people. And keep in mind, they don't have computers, they don't have technology, they don't have telephones, things like that. So everything is being done on paper. It's not like they can send an email out and say, hey guys, school starts on this day, show up. They have to contact people individually. So this office, despite the fact that a lot of people did a lot of amazing work in this office, they were not set up to be successful. They did not have the funding or the staff that they needed. So what ended up happening is lots of formerly enslaved people became sharecroppers. I'm going to kind of explain what sharecropping is. People were usually sharecroppers for their previous master because a lot of these people lived in really rural areas and didn't have access to any type of transportation. So it's not like they could just go walk down the street and get a job at the store. If you lived on a plantation and that plantation is hundreds of acres, Where are you going to go? So a sharecropper would be given land and seeds, and in exchange, he promises the landowner half the crop. So the landowner, let's call him Bill. Bill is like, hey, sharecropper, you can use my land. I'm so nice. I'll let you use my land. And then once the crops are ready, I'll get half and you'll get half. Sounded like it was going to work. But the problem is the sharecropper doesn't have any supplies. And it's not like you can grow a plant in one day. It takes months and months. So the sharecropper has to buy food and clothing from the landowner on credit. So the sharecropper is like, hey, Bill, I need some food. So I'll pay you back once we harvest. If I can just get some food, and then I'll pay you back once the harvest comes through. So the sharecropper plants and harvests the crops like you see. And then it's supposed to go to market, and it's supposed to be that the sharecropper gets half and the landowner gets half. But when they're settling up, Bill is like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We sold this cotton for $100, so I should get 50 and you should get 50. But remember when you borrowed all that money from me? You owe me $75. So I'm going to keep your 50 and you're in debt to me. So the sharecropper is like, oh my God, okay, next time, instead of giving you half of it, I'll give you extra to pay you back. But then the sharecropper is going to need more seeds and more supplies and more food. So by the time they get to the next season, they're just going to push themselves further into debt. So this is a cycle of poverty, because is the sharecropper ever going to make money? Nope. There's really no way you can make a profit in here, because every year you're going into debt. And so that debt is just going to accumulate. And a lot of people would be a sharecropper, and then their children would sharecrop for the same person. So even though this is technically not slavery, is their day-to-day life very different? Not really. You're still waking up every day and doing farm labor for someone else, and you are not receiving the profits of that labor yourself. So this is sharecropping. Very large percentage of people would become sharecroppers. So this is the Southern Sharecropping and Cotton Belt in 1880. So this is a map of the South, and this dark red that we see a lot, that means 35 to 80% of the farms are using sharecropping. So really, all the areas that were heavily relying on slavery, after the 13th Amendment was passed, they just kind of switched and they started relying on sharecropping. So all those people that had been enslaved, a lot of them are living the same day-to-day life, and they're still not being paid adequately for their labor. So moving on to prison labor. Prison labor became very widespread during this time as well because of this exception clause in the 13th Amendment. So this is not the entire amendment, but this is the important part I want to talk about right now. It says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as punishment for a crime. So that means if you are being punished for a crime, slavery is legal. This is kind of like a loophole. This still does exist to this day. It has not been changed. So this is that highlighted part created what I'm about to talk about. So at the start of Reconstruction, a lot of governments in the South started passing black codes. Black codes were legal methods of keeping formerly enslaved people in a position of servitude. A position of servitude means they're being held down and forced to do work for free. So while black codes varied from state to state, like I said, local governments and state governments were passing these. So the laws in Louisiana might look a little bit different than the laws in North Carolina. So the laws varied from state to state, but generally speaking, they authorize local officials to apprehend, that means arrest, unemployed Black Americans. It was illegal to not have a job. They would fine them from vagrancy, and then once they are in prison, they're being punished for a crime, so the prison would hire them out to private employers. So what that means, let's say I'm Mr. Warden. I'm the owner of the prison. And Bill comes to me and Bill is like, hey, I need some people to work on my farm. I'll give you $10 if you let me take all those prisoners with me, and I'll bring them back tomorrow. The money does not go to the prisoners. The money goes to the government. And again, a lot of these people, the only crime they committed was being unemployed or walking at night or things like that. Some of these laws forbid Black Americans from owning farms. So in some areas, even if you had money, it was illegal for you to own your own farm. And it would forbid them from, like I said, gathering in groups, walking at night, things like that. It varied place to place, but generally just restricted their day-to-day freedom. And when we look at this photo, is that all grown people? Is that all grown-ups? No. Tons of children, tons and tons of children. And back then, it's not like the kids went to juvie the way it is today. They would put young children in adult prisons and then hire them out to farm owners and business owners to work as forced labor. So these are some examples of Black codes from Mississippi. I'm not going to read through the whole thing because it has some offensive, outdated language and they're just very long. So we'll just read some parts of it. It shall not be lawful for any freedman, outdated language, to intermarry with any white person. So it's illegal to have mixed race marriages. Today that's legal, obviously, but back then it was not. It said all contracts for labor made with freedmen for longer than a period of 1 month shall be in writing. And it says that they're basically not allowed to quit and that he will surrender his wages if he quits. And then it says that they have to have lawful employment. They're not allowed to be unlawfully assembling themselves together. They will be convicted of vagrancy. So they're not allowed to gather in groups. They have to have a job. They can't intermarry. Does this look like freedom? Does this look like people were truly free after the 13th Amendment was passed? Doesn't look like freedom to me personally. So Black codes led to very, very high arrest numbers because if it's illegal to be outside at night, some people are going to get arrested for that. So arrests were often made by professional crime hunters. A lot of these professional crime hunters, they used to be runaway slave catchers. So they just kind of gave themselves a new title once slavery was abolished. So crime hunters got paid for each criminal they arrested, and these apprehensions escalated during times of increased labor needs. So if Bill needs extra workers for his farm, the crime hunter is going to have to arrest lots and lots of people. So lots of people who didn't hurt anyone, didn't steal anything, didn't do really anything to harm anybody, got arrested for crimes and then were forced to do manual labor for sometimes decades. Even people who were declared innocent in court still got forced to do labor to pay the court fees because they were like, oh, even though you're innocent, you owe the court $20 for this trial. So we're going to make you do work to pay back that $20. If they're innocent, why do they have to pay it back? Crazy, crazy. So companies and individuals paid leasing fees to state, county, and local governments in exchange for the labor of prisoners for farms, mines, lumber yards, that's wood, brick yards, that's where they make bricks, manufacturing facilities, railroads, factories, road construction. This went on until World War II. So really until the modern civil rights movement, this was actively happening. And all of these are real photos. This was very active. So when a lot of people say like slavery built America, Black Americans built America, this is what they're referring to. Tons of our infrastructure was built by convict labor between the Civil War and World War II. So for example, before the Civil War, the prison population in Alabama was 99% white. 99% of prisoners in Alabama were white before the Civil War. After the Civil War, 90% of the prisoners were Black. I don't think that all the white people stopped committing crimes or anything like that. This is because Alabama passed Black codes and then started arresting Black people in very high numbers. And most of these photos are of men, but this did exist with women as well. Many women were arrested as well. It was not just men getting arrested, but there are more photographs of the men because they were doing more manual labor. And a lot of times women would be doing more like household domestic labor. So, for example, the Tennessee Coal and Coal, Iron, and Railroad Company, TCI, was one of the 12 original companies listed in the Dow Jones. That means one of the major companies that founded America's economic system of stock exchange. Like, when you see the New York Stock Exchange and all that, they were one of the first companies to do that. They were also one of the largest users of prison labor, and almost all of their prison labor was African Americans that had been convicted of petty crimes. And the number of convicts employed increased after another company purchased TCI in 1907. So this was not just going on for like 1 or 2 years after the Civil War. This was going on for decades and decades and decades. So I want you to let us know on your paper or in the comments what stood out to you today, what questions do you have, and what lesson or what does this lesson make you wonder? What stood out to me personally is the black codes. Those laws are insane to me, and it is disgusting that they were passed. One question that I have is, I kind of mentioned it earlier, how were women affected by this? A lot of the photos we see are of men, so I'm curious about more information of what women's experience was like. And what does this lesson make you wonder? I'm wondering how much wage money was lost out on. Like, if these people had been getting paid for their work, how much money would that have been? So let me know in the comments or anywhere else what you thought of this. I hope that you got a lot out of this, and I will see you next time, and thank you for being here.